Order. Jack Lopresti to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I beg to move that this House has considered the relationship between the UK and the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Thank you, Madam Chairman. It is indeed a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning. The relationship between Iraqi Kurdistanis and the UK, people and governments, goes back many decades, but has emerged as a more enduring and vital alliance in the last third of a century and for great mutual benefit. Before that, Kurdistanis, as they prefer to be called, were long demonised in Iraq as second-class citizens. This developed into genocide in the 1980s, formally recognised by the House of Commons on the 25th anniversary of that tragic event. This was the gassing in 1988 by Saddam Hussein's Air Force of the town of Halabja, with the instant death of 5,000 people and many maimed for life. Overall, nearly 200,000 people were murdered in a systematic genocide that also razed thousands of villages to the ground and destroyed the backbone of its rural economy. Many Kurdistanis were exiled here before returning. That drives a great affinity with the UK and with the widespread use of English. That living link was boosted when Saddam, defeated in Kuwait in 1991, turned on the Kurdistanis with genocidal intent. So they revolted, and about 2 million people fled to the freezing mountains to escape Saddam's revenge. I am immensely proud that Sir John Major showed fantastic leadership and moral courage by establishing with America and France a no-fly zone. I'm delighted that the KRG agreed to name a major thoroughfare in Erbil after Sir John, and very much hope they do the same for Sir Tony Blair. The safe haven in which my honourable friend for Colne Valley participated in as an RAF officer averted further genocide and helped usher in an autonomous region. Kurdistanis elected their first parliament in 1992 and, despite harsh Iraq and UN sanctions, laid the basis of a new society that, for instance, bettered Saddam's Iraq in one key area, infant mortality. Sadly, civil war marred this fresh start. Iraqi Kurdistan won a place at the forefront of our foreign policy, which was a great advantage when Iraq was liberated in 2003. Kurdistani leaders stabilised the new Iraq with peaceful elections and a landmark constitution in 2005, based on federalism and rights for the officially recognised autonomous region. Kurdistan enjoyed a golden decade in which new oil, long denied by Saddam, boosted living standards and infrastructure in the other Iraq. But there were difficult challenges. Most important was Baghdad's refusal to implement a settlement by 2007 in which the people of Kirkuk and other disputed territories could choose to join Iraq or the autonomous region. This is unfinished business which requires greater attention, and I ask the Minister to comment on this in his remarks. Worse was to come with the complete and unilateral suspension of budget payments from Baghdad to Erbil in early 2014, and the sudden seizure by ISIS of Mosul in June 2014, and then attacking Kurdistan broadly. The Kurdistanis took the brunt of the defence of Iraq by saving Kirkuk, and then, with the refreshed Iraqi army and coalition forces, helping to liberate Mosul in 2017. I myself saw the Kurdistani army, the Peshmerga, which means those who defy death, in action in Kirkuk and in Mosul. The Peshmerga were valiant allies in fighting a foul fascism, with British help, especially from the RAF. Kurdistani action reduced a serious threat to our own people here in the United Kingdom. It was deeply disappointing that the Iraqi Prime Minister forgot to thank the Peshmerga at the UN, and that his reaction to a peaceful referendum in 2017 on the principle of independence, which I observed in 3 cities, was to violently seize Kirkuk, killing Peshmerga. Baghdad closed international flights and even unsuccessfully tried to invade the autonomous region. All this was a tragic indictment and demonstration of the very dysfunctional nature of the relationship between Baghdad and the KRG at the time, to say the least. The APPG returned in 2018 to Kurdistan, and for the first time to Baghdad, where there was a stated desire to seek reconciliation. Sadly, the momentum has stalled due to the undue influence of Iran and its proxy militias and terrorist organisation. Also, warfare and lawfare via a Supreme Court that has not been constitutionally established is destabilising and suffocating Kurdistan. Sheer militia attacks have targeted British and American military facilities at the main airport in Erbil. With pleasure.
I thank the honourable member for giving way and congratulate him on securing the debate. Would he agree with me that what we must not allow to happen is those elements, particularly in Iraq and other locations, to replace what most of us want to see, which is democratic accountability in each of these regions and nations, and trying to make that seem as if it is Western values and thereby devaluing the independence of those regions like Kurdistan?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. Absolutely agree. I think that you only have to look across the broader Middle East at the moment, where we've seen recent events and historical events of the malign influence of Iran, because they want to diminish and extinguish any country or region which exemplifies Western values of freedom and democracy.
The honourable gentleman.
With pleasure.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman giving way his expertise and knowledge of the area of Kurdistan. Is always a joy to listen to. He's mentioned Iran and recent attacks. We should, as a House, show our full solidarity to the Kurdish people against these attacks from Iran. Does he agree with that? And does he also agree that we need to start showing solidarity to a people who did more than anything else and had the boots on the ground to take on Daesh and roll them back?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. And again, I completely agree. I think we are seeing, as we speak, action being taken against Iran and their proxies. And as I will continue to elaborate and extend on the fact that we must continue to support our Kurdish friends and allies. Iran has attacked Iranian Kurdish camps and more recently the houses of two prominent businessmen on the laughable grounds that they were Mossad bases. In January, Iranian missiles killed Peshawar Dizai, whose skyscrapers in Erbil symbolise its ambition to emulate Dubai. His baby daughter was killed. More than 24 were killed or injured. Iran is the main menace. Let us hope for regime change from below in Iran, and I will come back to Iran at the end. It does not help that the PKK terror group is taking actions that kill Peshmerga, scupper good governance in key areas and attract Turkish military action. It would be better, and I think crucial, if British, American and other international allies stayed in Iraq with a military footprint of some measure, with agreement with Baghdad clearly, which will help counter and deter ISIS and stabilise the country. We could also train, in addition, as we are doing, further the Peshmerga and underpin the confidence of external investors, and negotiations began on this last year. Baghdad is also drip-feeding budget payments to Kurdistan below the amount stipulated by a clear political agreement. Its vital oil pipeline to Turkey remains closed after nearly a year with the loss of billions. Teachers, police officers, nurses and the Peshmerga are not being paid. The UK supports a strong KRG within Iraq. Our excellent diplomatic mission has gone from strength to strength with senior appointments and more staff that make the mission bigger than in many sovereign countries. Our army and others are seeking to professionalise and unify the Peshmerga so that it's completely controlled by the KRG and not by the two main political parties, which is a hangover from the civil war. Government control over the military and security apparatus is essential. Bilateral relationships depend on people active over many years. Kurdistan High Representatives in London, Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman, and now Kawan Jamal Tahir, who is here, have helped inform us. Our now voluntary APPG Secretary Gary Kent has been active on this for nearly 20 years, and I'd like to pay tribute to his excellent work and fantastic contribution to UK Kurdistan relations. The diaspora is an asset, as are Anglo-Kurdistani activities such as those of the Gulen charity on culture, for instance. Trade bodies have encouraged investments in areas where our companies can add niche value. The University of London is set to establish a campus in Erbil and join 3 universities that teach in English in a testament to the soft power of our language, history and higher education. The Kurdistan region is only 32 years old and has further to go in overcoming the economic and political pathologies of its past and of the wider Middle East. For over half its existence, we have closely observed the ebbs and flows in its fortune. Kurdistan is too small to go it alone and too big to be ignored, but operates on what its leaders call a tough neighbourhood, and even as a landlocked nation surrounded by sharks. It has previously overcome chauvinism towards it as a square peg in a round hole of Iraq, many of whose leaders don't accept the concept of a binational and federal state and prefer centralisation. For now, the centralisers, buttressed and supported by the malign Iranian regime, have the upper hand, but that not need triumph. That depends on Kurdistani diplomacy, crucial Western support, and internal reforms, so Kurdistan can be a subject rather than an object of history. But we mustn't and shouldn't put Kurdistan on an impossible pedestal where vice and virtue don't coexist. We should be candid friends. I'll start with the pros. First, given its experience of exile and oppression, it is open to those who flee from neighbouring areas. In 2014, its population soared by a third to accommodate 2 million displaced people from Mosul, as well as Syrian refugees. 1 million remain in Kurdistan, whose generous care is exemplary. Second, Kurdistan upholds peaceful coexistence of all faiths, including Muslims, Christians, Yazidis, and others. Its state institutions are secular, and its religious faith is moderate. Third, women's rights are in the vanguard in the Middle East in Kurdistan. Firm action was taken to stamp out FGM and domestic violence, but it's still and often looks like a man's world, which should change faster if Kurdistan is to unleash its fantastic potential. Fourth, its modernised road network and digital highway. A railway from the Gulf to Turkey could one day boost jobs, trade, and peace building. The cons apply across the Middle East, where Kurdistan fares better in reality. But these defects are drag anchors on making Kurdistan match fit. First, youth, as a majority of the population, seem disaffected. Judging by falling electoral turnout, they have to be part of a patriotic renewal. Better high and vocational education can prepare them for jobs that don't currently exist and opportunities which are coming. Secondly, the economy is dangerously dependent for over 80% of revenues on oil and gas reserves and a very bloated and unproductive public sector. The energy reserves are of strategic interest to the UK and the West generally, which the Minister could and I hope will comment on. Third, reliance on a volatile commodity crowds out a dynamic private sector, which can complement democracy and a thriving civil society. Fourth, the scourge of corruption. Less industrial than the South, must be eliminated. The judicial system and dispute resolution, important for foreign investors, is immature, and there is an authoritarian approach to dissent and the media, which needs to be more professional and reliable. Britain could provide more judicial, media, policing and commercial training. The crisis in relations with Baghdad and the material basis of public services are driving more determined reform. The KRG seeks to diversify its economy through more agriculture, tourism and light industry. Visitors marvel at its beautiful, vast plains, rivers and mountains in the Iraqi breadbasket, plus vibrant, growing cities. Kurdistan say they have no friends but the mountains. The APPG has sought to disprove that through 15 delegations with 50 parliamentarians and others. And this is not just about solidarity, but a pragmatic calculation of the allies we need and who share our values. Kurdistan could have sided with Iran, but stuck with us in these very difficult and dangerous times. So finally, Madam Chairman, reform requires peace and stability, which Kurdistan lacks. But I must end with a blunt warning about its current perilous plight. Kurdistan is completely defenceless, with no means of detecting or deterring missile and drone attacks, or even evacuating target areas. Iran and its proxies are victimising and attacking Kurdistan. The UK should help stand up for and protect our dear friends so we have a strong KRG within a peaceful, stable federal Iraq.
I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. The question is that this House has considered the relationship between the UK and the Kurdistan region of Iraq. I now call John McDonnell.
Thank you, Chair. We're here as friends of Kurdistan, but we're here as candid friends of Kurdistan. I've worked over the years with the International Federation of Iraqi Refugees, and particularly Dashti Jamal, as we're naming people. The Kurdish community within my area stems from the 1980s, with the, in particular, a group of Kurdish students who were at Brunel University when Halabja was gassed, and we lost thousands of lives then. And many of them remained and have settled in the local community and made a major contribution to it. I have to say, at the time, my Conservative predecessor actually supported Saddam Hussein when that occurred, the disgrace of this Parliament, I believe. As a candid friend, I want to raise two issues, and I do it as a trade unionist, basically. And the first is with regard to the current teachers' strike that's taking place. And then the second, because I'm the Secretary of the NUJ, National Union Journalist Group in Parliament, I want to raise the issue around the treatment of journalists in particular. I think the Honourable Gentleman has been very straightforward with regard to the suppression of dissent and the issues around corruption and the lack of adequate judicial enforcement of the law at the moment. So we have to be straight with people. I'll read, members, very briefly the letter that's come out from the National Council of Nationwide Council of Protesting Teachers in Kurdistan, because this dispute now has gone on for months and it's causing immense concern and suffering with regard to the teachers themselves and their families. Very briefly, the first paragraph is this. We, the Nationwide Council of Protesting Teachers, comprised of representatives from 13 protesting border cities and towns, wish to inform UI parliamentarians that after 130 days of civil struggle, boycotts, demonstrations and the loss of an academic season, the KRG authorities, instead of meeting our basic demands, which includes return of promotion, fair promotion, recruitment of teachers, payment of salaries every 30 days, and determining the fate of what they believe are 44 stolen salary months, the KGA are currently engaging in illegal, inhuman and violent pressure and threats against teachers in general and members leading protests in particular. What's happening in this dispute, unfortunately, it's a straightforward dispute about payment of wages. The teachers have not been paid now for 4 months, and as a result of that, their families are on the edge of destitution in many instances. All they're asking for is payment of salaries on a monthly basis, and that there is a resumption of the promotion of teachers and other employees in the education sector, and to end the casual contracts that many have been forced to take in recent periods. And I have to say also on the politics of this, we have to be straight to what the teachers are saying is that they want to stop the meddling, as they describe it, of the dominant parties in the affairs and works of government institutions, and in particular the education system. I think there are fair demands that we should support, and we urge the authorities to come to a speedy resolution of this dispute, because it's infecting other areas of civil society and political life at the moment. The second issue is on behalf of the journalists. I'm afraid there's been a long period in the last 5 years in particular with regard to the treatment of journalists who sought to report accurately and fairly on the activities of, in particular, political institutions within Kurdistan, but generally in terms of civil society issues themselves. And I just have to say, the reports we're getting back is that there's been a fairly ruthless crackdown since 2020. It intensified around them because protests were taking place and the journalists were trying to report those protests. And what we received reports through the union then was that the arbitrary arresting and in fact forcible disappearing of a number of journalists. It wasn't just the union that was reporting, as Amnesty did a report on it as well, and I found it deeply worrying. What Amnesty said at the time is that authorities in the Kurdistan region of Iraq have launched a chilling crackdown in their efforts to silence critics over the past year. This was 2020. They have rounded up activists and journalists and prosecuted them on trumped-up charges in unfair trials and harassing or intimidating family members who were kept in the dark about the status of their loved ones. That, at the time, was the Deputy Director of Amnesty International for the Middle East and North Africa. It's gone on. At that point in time, the Amnesty investigated the case of 14 people from Badinan who were arbitrarily arrested between March and October 2020 by the KRG Security and Intelligence Forces and also the Kurdistan Democratic Party Intelligence. And that was in connection specifically with the reporting of their the protests and the criticism of local authorities as a result of their journalistic work. At that point, and I'm afraid there's further evidence that's come to light, there was evidence of torture and ill-treatment during detention themselves, and a number of confessions extracted under duress. In fact, the Paris-based Reporters Without Borders, published on the World Freedom Press Day on May the 3rd each year, at the moment Iraq is ranked 167th out of 180 countries for press freedom, which is worrying in itself. In addition to that, it ranks 5th out of those 180 countries on the list of countries where journalists are killed and the killers escape punishment. And that was the renowned, respected report of the Committee to Protect Journalists. So Iraq actually is still, including Kurdistan, one of the most dangerous areas for journalists to work in at the moment. Recently, there's been alarm sounded about the renewal of the sentencing of journalists, some of them for up to 6 years in prison, and then the renewal of sentences. And I just want to report on a number of individuals to highlight their cases very briefly. Reporters Without Borders sounded the alarm about increased violations of press freedom and the renewal of the sentence, in particular, Shawani, which was described in the media in this country as cruel and outrageous punishment. On October the 1st, 2023, the Erbil court sentenced journalist Godar Zibari to another 6 months in prison. And what seems to be the practice is the 6 month is renewed fairly regularly for him. It was the 3rd time that this sentence has been renewed. Again, Rosneft News reporter Zolman Ahmad, whose lawyer and relatives are still not allowed to see him, was arrested in late October last year on charges of having links with the PKK, but without any evidence that was brought forward. And again, what the relatives are asking for is access, but in addition to that, greater transparency with regard to what evidence is being brought forward to justify the person's arrest. Again, the arrests of journalists peak when the demonstrations are taking place or when there's industrial disputes like the teachers' disputes at the moment. And the targeting of journalists who are campaigning around these particular issues has been one that has obviously been interpreted by people locally, but also within the journalistic community globally, about another regime that's seeking to silence the voice of the people as reported by the journalists. And there appears to be a lack of accountability through the judicial system. The Honourable Gentleman made reference to the improvements that are needed to ensure that there's a fair and independent judicial system. I'm afraid when it comes to journalists and trade unionists, there's a feeling that the judicial system is not independent, is not fair, and in fact becomes a tool of politicians aiming to silence critics of their activities. As has been said, the British government has a particular relationship with Kurdistan and the Kurdish people because of our history and because of the activities that have taken place over recent years, in particular to establish some form of Kurdistan and to try and encourage its development as a democratic state accountable to its people. Unfortunately, some of the foundation stones of that democratic state that we hope for, particularly with regard to the freedom of trade unions and the freedom of journalists, I think are being undermined by the current regimes. And as a result of that, I think there's a responsibility placed upon the UK government. In fact, I think it behoves us overall to make sure that we voice our concerns to the current administrations and do all we can to put pressure on them to abide by certain basic democratic standards. Recognition and freedom of trade unions, the recognition and freedom of journalism, journalists to be able to report without hazard, particularly without hazard to their physical security. So I urge the government now to make an honest approach to the Kurdistan administrations, to express the support that we have for Kurds and Kurdistan itself, but also to say very, very clearly, standards are not good enough at the moment, and in particular, one action that could be taken fairly quickly to reassure people that there is faith in the democratic process is the settlement of the teachers' dispute and the protection of journalists.
I now call Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yesterday, Madam Chair, you and I were together in this Westminster Halls side by side, supporting a subject which you and I have great interest in on the same side. And funny enough, the same minister was in his place. Now it's a pleasure for me to serve under your chairship in this hall today. So a real pleasure, Madam Chair, to do that. Can I give special thanks to the Honourable Gentleman for Fulton and Bradley Stroke for highlighting the concerns that he so rightly holds in this place today. The decision on the UK's relationship with the Kurdistan region of Iraq is of great importance. A real pleasure also to follow the Honourable Gentleman for Hayes and Hellington for his contribution. He always speaks up for the journalists in any of these debates when it comes to freedom of expression, and we commend him for that. The discussion on the UK's relationship with the Kurdistan region of Iraq is of great importance. Our relationship with this region cannot be understated, both in diplomatic relations, but also, and I refer to this, Madam Chair, as my core issue for this debate. It won't be a surprise to any. I believe in terms of freedom of religion or belief, and I'm going to give some examples of that if I can in my contribution. I had the opportunity a few years ago with the Action to the Church of Need to Iraq to visit. I didn't go to Kurdistan, but I did go to Erbil and other parts about. So I have perhaps some understanding of what happens, but I have a fairly big understanding, Madam Chair, of the issue of freedom of religious belief, and I wish to speak about that specifically. I know the ministers in this place. I look forward very much to the minister's contribution, always helpful, and to the two shadow ministers, my good friend, the member for Argyll and Butte, who I know he and I are on the same page in this subject matter, and very much forward to the Labour shadow minister as well. With the current military strikes in the region from both Turkey and Iran-backed groups, UK support grows with importance. The area is not new to armed conflicts, unfortunately it's not, but it's also been a safe haven for religious minorities to flee from armed conflict in nearby areas and countries. Christians, Yazidis, Sunni Muslims have arrived in the region for protection from persecution in their previous homelands. However, these minorities now still lack legal protections and face persecution from authorities and society at large in the region. For instance, the Kurdistan Regional Council, the KRG, failed to substantially carry out the provisions of the 2020 United Nations brokered Sinjar Agreement to help stabilise the area and enable the return of Yazidis displaced by ISIS genocide. And it was genocide, and I know the Honourable Gentleman for Argyll and Butte has spoken about this many, many times through his APPG on genocide. There continue to be territorial and jurisdictional disputes between the Iraqi federal government and the KRG, which has resulted in the seizure of Christians, those of Christian denomination and religion, their land and their businesses. And there seems to be no action whatsoever to address that. So I wish to address that issue if I can. Additionally, targeted harassment has deterred many displaced Christians from returning to the area and increasing immigration to the area. So the question, Minister, is how has the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland attempted to broach these displacements of religious minorities in Kurdistan? And secondly, and further to that, over the past few years, Iraqi military forces have targeted religious minorities that have displaced some 3,000 Yazidis, previously displaced by the recurrent Turkish airstrikes. The Yazidis, wherever they go, they seem to be persecuted, they seem to be under pressure, and I have to speak up for them today. The next question that must be raised is to ascertain whether the United Kingdom government or SEDO have attempted to broach discussions between Turkey and the KRG. Has there been any indication that that has happened? If it has happened, I welcome that, but if it hasn't happened, it should. And how can the Minister, on behalf of the UK government, do that? Or has further discussions with the IFG regarding the protection of religious minorities from rising conflicts and territorial disputes? I'd be very keen, and we all be very keen, to understand what has taken place and what further could be done. The KRG has rightfully attempted to promote religious cohesion for more than 2 million displaced religious minorities from Iraq and Syria from conflicts with ISIS. Some Christian groups indigenous to the plains of Nineveh, which I had the pleasure and privilege to visit in my visit to Iraq some years ago, raised concerns over the KRG's failure to resolve long-standing grievances, such as lack of KRG funding and other support for Assyrian-run schools, discrimination in employment, municipal service, and the unresolved KRG tolerated or initiated misappropriation of Christians' land, businesses and other property. I say that again because it's important. And my job in this House is to raise these matters and make sure that, and hopefully, that our Minister and our Government can respond. This has to be addressed. Christian residents have cited their lack of security, threats from ISIS, the PMF, PMU and the KRG as the main drivers of immigration from the area, bringing their ancient communities almost to the point of extinction. It can't go on. I'd also be keen to understand what efforts has the UK made in providing aid and other support to the KRG, specifically for these religious minorities. Now, if we haven't, then we need to. And again, I asked the Minister that question. In August 23, the Prime Minister, Masroor Barzani of the Kurdistan region reaffirmed the KRG's commitment to supporting the rights of the Yazidis and emphasising the importance of the Sinjar Agreement. So there is a willingness among some in Iraq and in that area to do that. And I would like to give encouragement for that, more of that to happen. But he also stressed that the IFG needs to meet the Kurdistan region's financial entitlements. The disputes, for instance, over oil and gas are one way that religious minorities are suffering. Is there aid going to the KRG to help with the internally displaced peoples and equally distributed amongst the religious minorities? If it's not, it needs to be and it should. And I make that plea on behalf of those people. As the Israeli-Hamas war has begun to spill over into Kurdistan region from Iranian missiles, the individuals most vulnerable to increased violence and attacks are these displaced religious minorities, as many Yazidis remain in the internally displaced people's camps as well. Again, we have to reach out, Madam Chair, and help these people. Lord Ackman, our representative, and I'm very proud of him and what he does across the world, and he's a great spokesperson for the United Kingdom government, but he's a great spokesman because he believes it in his heart when it comes to these things. He's emphasised in his recent visit the need to protect freedom of religion or belief and the importance of interfaith dialogue, how important that is anywhere in the world, but more so in here. And how do we accomplish this in reality? Again, a question I pose to the Minister. The United Kingdom has supported the Kurdistan autonomy, and perhaps that is still the best route, I think so, and it is anyway, for ensuring the protections of religious individuals and the right to FORB. In February 2021, an EDM was introduced to address FORB in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, stating religious leaders are frequently consulted by ministers and government officials of the KRG. But have these actions continued? Again, Minister, if it's possible to give us some response to this, I really would appreciate it. And if not today, certainly let all the members know in the usual fashion. At that time, and I quote this, the Ministry of Endowment and Religious Affairs focuses on establishing, managing and supervising mosques and religious sites and meeting their needs, supervising, monitoring and investing in the Waqf properties to grow their revenues, supervising annual pilgrimages to Mecca for citizens of the Kurdistan region, preparing a new generation of religious scholars with a modern national education, and supporting and reviving various religious events. That's what they committed themselves back to 2021. That's what I think they need to commit themselves again and renew that perhaps as well. So what communications have been held with the Ministry of Endowment and Religious Affairs in developing UK policies and relations in the area and protecting the rights of religious minorities? So I make this plea on behalf of those who are subjected to persecution because of their beliefs, those with Christian faith, those with other faiths, and indeed those with no faith, because they all should have the equal opportunities, fair and equitable treatment and opportunities in the region. UK's close ties with Kurdistan region place us in a unique position, I believe, to help these religious minorities. And it is my belief, Madam Chair, that we can and must do more diplomatically and practically. There's a twin goal. We can help them practically, physically with aid, but we also need to help them diplomatically and make sure that the thrust and the core focus of what we're trying to promote, the human rights and the right of religious expression in the way that you wish. So I look to the Minister to outline how we can better engage and support with those minorities who are most at risk and most in need. I know the Minister will be very open to the idea of moving forward with this additional support, so I look forward to the Minister's response. I conclude with this sentence, Madam Chair. We have a responsibility, and I do believe that there is a scope to enhance how successful we are in achieving the aim of proving help and support. And perhaps we can look to the movement today as another step in that journey that we are all on together. We might have different opinions in the journey we're on, but we're all on the same journey of life. And I believe in this world, Madam Chair, that we have a responsibility to speak up for others across the world. This is the great platform that we have as elected representatives. Let's express that on behalf of all those people. I know the Minister's always commentating. I appreciate that. We all appreciate that. But I think that when it comes to moving forward together, we can absolutely do good to all men and to all women across the region. Madam Chair, thank you so much.
I call front bench speeches. The first of those would be SNP spokesperson Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Ms Bardell. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair for this morning's debate. And I too would like to thank the Honourable Member for Filton and Bradley Stoke for securing it and for the way he opened it. And I would also like to thank the Honourable Members for Hayes and Harlington and Strangford for contributing to what has been a very well-informed and thoughtful debate on this important strategic relationship. And although replying on behalf of the SNP, I should also point out that I am and have been since 2016 chair of the all-party parliamentary group on the Yazidis, and I, like many others, have had the privilege of visiting the region. Indeed, it was exactly a year ago I flew into Erbil and visited Dohuk, Shakan, the holy site of Lalash, and several of the Yazidi IDP camps, a subject which I will return to later. But I do want to put on record my sincere thanks to the member for Strangford for raising the plight of Christians, Yazidis and other religious minorities in Kurdistan. And as soon as I saw him in his place this morning, I never doubted for a moment that he would. Ms Bardell, as we've heard, the Honourable Member for Filton and Bradley Stoke spoke movingly of the hideous genocide of the 1980s in which tens of thousands died at the hands of Saddam Hussein, and he was absolutely right to highlight the crucial role played by Sir John Major, as since 1992 the Kurdish people have enjoyed a democratically elected government of their own, giving freedoms and rights to people which would have been unimaginable under the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein. And notwithstanding the very real concerns raised by the Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington about the current situation around journalistic freedom and the freedom of trade unions, those rights and freedoms have been strengthened through the emergence of a whole raft of civic society organisations, NGOs, women groups, alongside an institutionalised tolerance for religious, ethnic and linguistic minorities. And following the fall of Saddam Hussein, there was the first independence referendum in 2005, which saw a 99% support for the creation of an independent Kurdish state. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm very grateful for my honourable friend giving way, like the honourable member for Hayes and Harlington. It was the actions of the Saddam Hussein regime that's allowed a thriving Kurdish community to develop in Scotland, in Glasgow and Edinburgh, for example, and that is best celebrated, is it not, with the election of Councillor Rosa Sally, who was Scotland's first refugee councillor, a woman of very proud Kurdish roots, and we are equally as proud of her, aren't we?
I thank my honourable friend for making that contribution, and I would add to what he said in absolute agreement. And I think that Councillor Sally is a shining example of a young refugee woman who has recognised that she has a contribution to make, and we are very, very grateful that she has made and continues to make that contribution to Scotland. The referendum of 2005, of course, did not lead to the independent Kurdistan because of threats from neighbouring countries, but what it did do was to have the autonomy of the Kurdistan region enshrined into the new Iraqi constitution, and which promised the protections of autonomy of citizenship based on a federal, ethnically diverse and inclusive model with strong minority rights and guarantees against discrimination. And it will come as no surprise to anyone present that, like the honourable member for Filton and Bradley Stoke, the SNP does support Kurds' right to self-determination and to decide their own constitutional future. And we fully understand why, despite having a degree of autonomy, the people of Kurdistan still want their independence, a desire expressed again in no uncertain terms in 2017, with another referendum in which 92% backed independence on a turnout of 72%. And it would be foolish in the extreme for anyone to assume that this desire has gone away. And again, quoting the words of the Honourable Member from Filton and Bradley Stoke ahead of the 17 referendum, he said when he sympathised with the Kurdish position and he understands why the Kurds feel that federalism has failed and their belief that it cannot be revived. And it's essential, therefore, that in building a healthy, cooperative, mutually respectful relationship with the Kurdistan region of Iraq, that the United Kingdom never loses sight of that fierce desire they have for their own independent nation-state. Ms Bardell, there is no doubt that today the UK Government does have a key role in facilitating the development of a good relationship between the Kurdistan region and the rest of Iraq, one which helps realise the economic potential of both and strengthens the security and democratic governments, not just in Iraq but in the region as a whole. Because we've seen in recent weeks and we've heard from other members that these are extremely worrying and volatile times for the whole region. Tensions between the KRG and the federal government in Baghdad have not gone away, and they're currently being exacerbated by a fiercely contested dispute over the status of the province of Kirkuk and control of its oil fields. The Honourable Member for Filton and Bradley Stoke was right when he said it was against this backdrop and the unfolding catastrophe in Gaza that there was an attack last month by an Iran-affiliated group who launched a missile attack claiming to have hit an Israeli spy base near Erbil. It was a blatant and flagrant breach of sovereignty, which was rightly condemned by both the KRG and the federal government. But of course, Iran has form on this, having already attacked Kurdistan in 2022, in part in response to the protests following the death of the young Iranian Kurdish woman Masha Amini. The attacks of last year killed 20 people, including civilian women, refugees and children. And of course, a long-running conflict between Turkey and the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, and a conflict which has seen thousands, tens of thousands killed in the last 4 decades, has never been resolved. And I thank the Honourable Member for Strangford again for raising the question is exactly what the UK can do to help facilitate a deal between the PKK and Turkey, and anything the UK and its partners can do to bring stability, dial down tension and crucially avoid any escalation would be extremely welcome right now. Of course, Kurdistan isn't just having to cope with external pressures. Internally, it's having to cope with the consequences of the war on Daesh and the mass influx of people fleeing that barbaric onslaught. After the attack on Sinjar and the appalling genocide of the Yazidis which followed, when Daesh fighters killed thousands of men and boys and abducted male children to fight as child soldiers and kidnapped and sold into sexual slavery Yazidi women and girls, 2,700 of whom are still missing today and whose fate we cannot ever allow to be forgotten. Those who could fled, many to Kurdistan. They never expected to stay and have always yearned to return to their home in Sinjar to rebuild their lives. But that hasn't happened because of a lack of security and an all-too-real fear that although Daesh has been defeated militarily, the ideology that fueled them is still very much alive. This has resulted in a refugee crisis in Kurdistan with more than 120,000 Yazidis still living in dire poverty in makeshift camps almost a decade after fleeing their homes in Sinjar when Daesh attacked. I visited, as I said, just this time last year, several of those IDP camps with the humanitarian NGO Bellwether International to see the conditions in which the Yazidi people are forced to live. It was a harrowing experience seeing thousands of families living in row after row of plastic sheet tent, seeing children who have been born into these camps and know nothing else but growing up in these conditions, while their parents, particularly their mothers, still live with the trauma they went through at the hands of Daesh. These camps are desperate places in which people who want to return are losing hope And I cannot escape the conclusion that the international community has completely abandoned these poor people and no longer sees their situation as an emergency, leaving it to the Kurdish regional government, NGOs and charities to look after them. So, as well as all the other issues that have been raised by honourable members today, I ask the government, please do not forget, do not turn your back on the Yazidis stuck in these IDP camps, and please be part of finding a long-term solution which will allow them to return home to rebuild their lives in security and in safety.
I call Labour Opposition Spokesperson Wayne David.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under you, Mr Barnhill. I congratulate the honourable member for Filton and Bradley Stoke for securing this morning's debate. The honourable member has been to Kurdistan on a number of occasions and is chair of the APPG on Kurdistan. I'm one of the vice chairs of the group, and I know he has a great deal of knowledge about the region and has visited Kurdistan indeed on a number of occasions. I hope to go there before too long. As I would expect, my honourable friend has given a truly comprehensive overview of the region, making reference to its recent history and the good things which have occurred in Kurdistan, and also what needs to be addressed in future as well. We've heard from the member for Hayes and Harlington about the situation regarding teachers and journalists, and I'm certain that the Minister will have taken note of his comments and will respond to them. We also heard from the member from Strangford, who spoke eloquently of the importance of religious toleration and freedom, particularly the situation regarding Christians and Yazidis, which have been referred to by the SNP spokesperson. Now, although I haven't been to Kurdistan, as a member for a seat in South Wales, I have felt on occasions that I know Kurdistan quite well. I say that not because of the spectacular scenery and the wonderful mountains in Kurdistan, but because I was a good friend of the late Anne Clwyd, the former member for Cynon Valley, who passed away last year. I knew Anne very well, and I know she had a great affection for Kurdistan and was well respected in the region. Indeed, when I attended her memorial service in Aberdare last autumn, Kawin Jamal Tahir, as well as a senior minister from the Iraqi government, also attended. And it was really important, I think, to have such a high representation from Kurdistan as well as the Iraqi government present at her memorial service. The Kurdistan region in Iraq is known as the beloved North, and that is because of its spectacular landscapes and its relatively temperate climate. The region has tremendous potential, and the honourable member for Filton and Bradley Stoke has correctly highlighted the importance of developing the bilateral relationship between our two countries. Indeed, that was a common theme throughout all of the contributions that we've heard this morning. There are around 200 British companies who currently operate in the Kurdistan region, and I know that the British government is keen to promote UK investment as best it can. As the member who introduced this debate has said, educational links are also vitally important. The University of London is in the process of establishing a campus in Erbil, the capital of Kurdistan, and will join 3 universities that already teach through a medium of English. This is not to suggest, however, that Kurdistan does not face significant challenges. It does. The relationship with Baghdad could be much better than is currently the case. Oil exports from Iraqi Kurdistan to Turkey have been paused since late March 2023, and arbitration over this issue has been taking place. This is a vitally important issue, as oil accounts for 80% of the region's budget. This is part of an ongoing dispute about finance and the constitutional position linked to this needs to be clarified as a matter of urgency. A crucial part of the Erbil-Baghdad argument concerns disputed territories such as Kirkuk. The Kurdish governor in Kirkuk called on Kurdish forces to urgently reinforce their military presence to save Kirkuk from ISIS back in 2014 and then controlled its oil fields. But after the disputed independence referendum of 2017 in Kurdistan, those disputed regions and oil fields were retaken by Iraqi government forces. I understand that there were violent protests in Kirkuk in the autumn only of last year, but the dispute is still unresolved. Another large and important issue is corruption. Corruption in the regional government's administration and elsewhere in the country is, I understand, a huge problem. Although it has to be kept in perspective, because it is suggested that corruption in other parts of Iraq is far more deep-seated. But nevertheless, corruption needs to be addressed and rooted out in a really determined way. There is, of course, the issue, as we've heard this morning, of security. Since the 1980s, Turkey has been engaged in military action against the PKK, formerly the Kurdistan Workers' Party, a prescribed terrorist organisation here in the UK. In October of last year, Turkey launched a number of attacks, and these have continued into this year. While I appreciate that the government recognises Turkey's legitimate security interests in Iraq, I am concerned about regional instability, and I would ask the Minister if he could say a few words about the government's position on this. There is also the issue of recent Iranian missile attacks. Only last month, Iran launched a missile attack targeting what it called an, quote, Israeli spy base. At least 4 civilians were killed and 6 were injured in the strikes, according to the Kurdistan government. Among the dead were a multi-millionaire Kurdish businessman and members of his family, and a senior Kurdish intelligence officer. Now, I would be appreciative if the Minister could provide us with an update on this attack and the situation regarding relations with Iran. Now, in conclusion, Mr. Patel, I think we all agree links between the UK and Kurdistan are strong and they are positive. We have a large Kurdish diaspora in the United Kingdom, and they make a huge and positive contribution to our economy and our culture. We also have an important relationship with the autonomous region of Kurdistan, as we've heard this morning. The important thing now is to develop and take forward that relationship. That will certainly be to our mutual benefit, and I look forward to hearing from the Minister how the government intends to further develop that relationship in line with its stated policy of supporting a strong Kurdistan region in a strong and unified Iraq. Thank you.
Minister. Neil Docherty.
Madam Chair, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Filton and Bradley Stoke, for securing this important debate, and I think all colleagues will pay tribute to his long-standing interest in Kurdistan region of Iraq and his work as chair of the all-party group. And of course, I'm here in place of the Enabled Lord Ahmed, who is the lead minister from our department, but of course, being in the other place, cannot be here this morning, but he will be taking note of this debate. And I'm very grateful for the points raised across the House. And of course, I think we're all very pleased also to have in the audience His Excellency Mr. Karwan Jamal to hear, who does such energetic and effective work to foster relations between the Kurdistan region and the UK. And of course, the Honourable Member for Filton and Bradley Stoke quite rightly paid tribute to the excellent work over 2 decades of Mr. Gary Kent, who also joins us here this morning, who has been tirelessly promoted relations between the Kurdistan region and UK over 2 decades. It's very good to see Mr. Kent here. this morning. Of course, the UK's connection to the Kurdistan region dates back more than a century. It's of tremendous historical weight, but of modern relevance. And we continue to work closely today together towards our shared aspiration for a secure, stable and thriving Kurdistan region of Iraq within a peaceful and prosperous Iraq. And I must start, of course, in the context of the comments laid out by the Honourable Member for Filton and Bradley-Stoke, by extending my deepest condolences to those affected by the outrageous strikes on our bill on the 15th of January, including the family of Karam Michael, a UK-Iraqi dual national. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, the Foreign Secretary condemned it as callous and reckless. This was a callous and reckless attack by the Iranian regime. We're very clear about that. There's no justification for targeting innocent civilians, and these strikes were an unacceptable violation of Iraq's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and the Foreign Secretary made this very clear to his Iranian counterpart when they spoke. The Cormor gas field was also attacked on the 25th of January. The attack undermined efforts to build a more stable and prosperous future for the people of KRI. And as the Honourable Gentleman laid out, we have seen an increase in regional attacks in recent months. Iran-aligned militia groups have targeted coalition forces across Iraq and Syria more than 160 times since the 7th of October. So this is a trend, of course, we're very concerned by and focus on. Iran bears responsibility for the actions of groups they have long supported, and it must use its influence to curb these attacks and to de-escalate regional tensions. Turning now to elections, as my honourable friend has mentioned, democracy in the Kurdistan region of Iraq has been hard won in the face of adversity, and it should be celebrated and protected. Elections are a vital part of a thriving democratic process, and it is, of course, therefore disappointing that they have been delayed. And we hope that everyone, including the relevant institutions in Baghdad, will work hard to ensure they can happen as soon as possible, indeed before the Independent High Electoral Commission mandate expires on the 7th of July. Of course, the KRI's semi-autonomy has been eroded since the unilateral referendum in 2017 failed to win the region, failed to progress the region towards independence. And the breakdown in relations between the two main political parties in KRI, the KDP and the PUK, has of course had a negative impact on the region's prosperity, security and stability. And of course we therefore believe that Iraq is stronger and more stable when the Kurdish parties work together to play a constructive role in terms of broader Iraqi politics, and that's something that has been mentioned today. I should also just like to say a word about the points raised by the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman for Hayes and Harlington about media freedom. Those points are well received. I can confirm to him that the Prime Minister and the Minister for the Middle East have raised our concerns over restrictions on media freedom with the Prime Minister of the Kurdistan Regional Government. During Lord Ahmed's visit to the KRI in March, he raised concerns over restrictions on media freedom with senior figures in the KRG, and our ambassador in Baghdad and our Consul General in Erbil regularly meet Kurdish journalists, human rights activists and members of civil society to discuss their concerns and continue to underline UK's enduring commitment to human rights and freedom of expression. So we are aware of the context and we will continue to advocate for greater media freedom in KRG in the context of Iraq as a whole. Turning to the matter of oil exports, which was raised by the Honourable Gentleman for Kafili, and especially through the Iraq-Turkey pipeline, of course, we hope to see a sustainable and satisfactory resolution to this issue. The political and economic implications are grave and very significant and are therefore a source of deep concern to us. We hope to see things improve in the context of an improvement of Turkish-Kurdistan relations, and that is something that we will continue to advocate for in our diplomacy towards both sides. So we continue to encourage cooperation between Baghdad and Erbil as well, and emphasise to the federal government as well as the regional government the importance of a stable constitutional arrangement that preserves the level of autonomy for the KRI, which is envisaged and laid out in the Iraqi constitution. So we're very clear about the constitutional obligations of the federal government. Turning to the global coalition against Daesh, as a leading member of this global coalition, we have continued to support the Iraqi security forces and indeed the Peshmerga, which was described by the Honourable Gentleman for Filton and Bradley Stoke. We have worked with the Peshmerga to help them tackle the threat from Daesh and to help them build their institutional capacity. The coalition's platform in Iraq is vital for its operations against Daesh in Syria as well, and as the threat evolves, it remains committed to ensuring this group's enduring defeat with an expanded NATO mission in Iraq and increasingly capable Iraqi security forces now conducting effective and independent counter-Daesh operations, and it's that independence that's so very important. So the UK welcomes the start of the higher military commission process led by the US and Iraq, and we look forward to contributing meaningfully to this process. Of course, our support for the development of the Iraqi security forces is in addition to the UK contribution to the NATO mission in Iraq, and our training for more than 110,000 members of the Iraqi security forces, including more than 20,000 members of the Peshmerga, is a hugely important contribution to that, and it's something of which we should be rightly proud. The UK, alongside the US, Germany and the Netherlands, continues to support and advise the KRI's Ministry of Peshmerga Affairs on its reform agenda. This reform agenda and the generation of an apolitical Peshmerga are very important and they're important and visible symbols of Kurdish unity, and it was very encouraging that Minister Schorsch returned to office to lead the ministry in November, and that's a relationship that we value. Now, of course, Daesh atrocities over the last decade have led a very grave and lasting legacy right across Iraq, but also including in KRI. The UK played a leading role in the establishment of the UN investigative team to promote accountability for crimes committed by Daesh, and we are committed to working closely with the government of Iraq and the UN to support its work. Last year, the UK formally recognised that Daesh committed acts of genocide against the Yazidis, an indigenous Kurdish minority, which the Honourable Gentleman from Argyll and Bute mentioned at length, and that mention was very welcome. And following the recognition, we continue to advocate for the full implementation of the Yazidi Survivors Law, which is crucial in securing justice for survivors and to help them rebuild their lives. And I can say that we are providing this year a further £100,000 to support the implementation of the law, and a total of £300,000 over 3 years. This funding will provide survivors with access to mental health and psychological support through local NGOs. So I'm pleased to confirm to the Honourable Member for Argyll and Bute that the HMG has not forgotten about the Yazidis, and we will continue in that path. This is important also in the context of religious freedom. I'm very grateful for the Honourable Gentleman from Strangford for raising that. It's very important that Christians have the freedom of worship that is their constitutional right, and I am very pleased to confirm that I think I'll ask my noble friend, the Lord Ahmed, to write with a full update, because he continues to advance this agenda very actively, and you know, and the Honourable Gentleman knows that the noble Lord Ahmed has a deep and sincere interest in this, and I will ask the Lord Ahmed to write to the Honourable Gentleman with an update. In terms of aid, Madam Chair, the UK has committed over £400 million to Iraq since 2014, including supporting displaced communities in the KRI. This has provided food for more than 200,000 people and healthcare services for more than 6 million people, so it is very significant. Our flagship Women's Voices First programme is helping to promote and support the role of women in preventing and resolving conflicts, as well as playing more powerful roles within their communities in Iraq. And actually, KRI, there is terrific examples of female leadership in the political and civic space, particularly within Kurdistan. Turning to climate change, the UK will build the capacity of the government of Iraq and the Kurdistan regional government to mitigate and adapt to climate change effects, such as increasing water scarcity. It's of keen interest to the agricultural sector in Kurdistan. Over the last 12 months, high-profile visits from my colleague Lord Ahmed, the Minister of State for the Middle East, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Edinburgh and the Security Minister have helped strengthen our partnerships and helped advance this important work. So the UK's deep connection to the Kurdistan region means that we continue to argue for Kurdish unity and democracy. We call on Iran to use its influence to curb regional attacks and to de-escalate tensions, which risk further destabilising the KRI. Meanwhile, we continue to encourage cooperation between Baghdad and Erbil. We continue to support efforts to counter terrorism and hold Daesh accountable for its atrocities. And we also continue to build our efforts to advance progress towards a more secure, peaceful and prosperous future for the KRI, including through support for women, peace and security, and measures to support climate change, countering climate change, as I mentioned. And I think it's clear that from the tone of this debate and the comments I've made, I think it's clear that we can be proud that the UK is committed, Madam Chair, to continuing our strong relationship with the KRI in the years to come to ensure the people of the KRI can look forward to a more stable and prosperous future. And I'm grateful for those contributions to this debate. Thank you.
Jack Lopresti to wind up.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, thank you to all colleagues this morning who've come to this debate and made thoughtful, well-informed contributions. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to both the front benches and in particular the government's continued reiteration of its support for the Kurdish region of Iraq, our bilateral relationship and all the assistance on all the fields the Minister mentioned. And we've been candid friends. We are hugely supportive and we are loyal to our Kurdish friends. But we have, well, somebody once said to me that your best friends aren't always the people who tell you what you want to hear. Well, more than once somebody's actually said that to me. But in fairness to the Kurdish government and the Kurdish people in northern Iraq, they are aware of the issues that they have, where there needs to be development, where there needs to be work. And not only are we pointing that out, we're actually helping and continuing to help and support. And finally, can I completely implore that we maintain and enhance our military and security presence in the region. We've seen too often and in recent years what happens when security and stability isn't maintained, the rise of ISIS in 2014, the return of the Taliban in Afghanistan, which I genuinely believed encouraged Putin to attack Ukraine.
The question is that this House has considered the relationship between the UK and the Kurdistan region of Iraq. As many of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the